Well, here it is, the new Buyer Representation and Broker Compensation Agreement, CAR Form BRBC, revised July of 2024. This is the new version of this form required for all realtors to use with their buyers beginning August 17th prior to touring their first property with the buyer. I'll go through this form. I'll show you how to fill it out properly. It's part of a 13-page bundle. So if I scroll to the top, we see the disclosure regarding real estate agency relationship, and you've all seen it before in a purchase agreement or the listing agreement, and you'll put your client's information and your information and move on to the actual representation agreement. And we put the date that this form is being prepared, the name of our client, and the name of our brokerage. Now, this formatting has changed with this revision. This form now has what I call a chart or matrix where all the key terms are summarized up front. And then it's the same stuff down here. This is just the corresponding text behind all these key terms. So this is like a summary page, but we'll go through it. It's quite simple, actually. There are just some important terms you want to pay attention to, starting with the representation period. You put a beginning date, you put an ending date. You must have both of those dates. If you are missing one or both, this form is unenforceable, likely void. So make sure to have both of these dates. Now it says not to exceed 3 months. If representation period exceeds 3 months, this agreement is void unless the buyer is a corporation. So we need to make sure that this representation period is less than 3 months. So that's why I put today's date, July 24th, and I put September 30th, just to make sure it's within that 3-month period. Of course, this form can be extended, so don't think that it's only 3 months and you got one shot and that's it. You can do extensions of this form. Now, this is very important, this line A2, type of representation. And by default, this is non-exclusive. You are in a non-monogamous relationship with your buyer if you do nothing on this line. Your buyer can work with plenty of other agents and have other forms just like this signed with them. Or you can do what I recommend, which is check this box and make it exclusive. And it's going to tell you that there's something else has to be done, an initial in paragraph 15. Now keep in mind, the nice part of this chart of terms summarized here on page 1 is that, see how it says paragraph number? You can see where to find the corresponding text regarding some of these terms. So each term you see up here, you can refer later to the corresponding text in this paragraph. So we see there's more text in 4B. More on this later, but in short, if you are working for free as a buyer's agent in hopes of getting paid if and when a transaction closes, shouldn't you ask for a little loyalty from your buyer? You're spending all this time, energy, resources, creating reports, doing consulting, driving around. Is it too much to ask this person shows a little loyalty with an exclusive relationship? I think not. So that's why I highly recommend checking this box. Property type, check any property type your buyer may buy. Location, I checked the county box. I put Orange. Orange is a relatively small county geographically relative to, let's say, neighboring counties like Los Angeles County or Riverside County. Those are much larger. So you have to be careful here because you want to put as much as possible, as broad as possible, but you can't be too broad because if a buyer wanted to contest this, the buyer could say, well, my agent can't reasonably service this. You can't put San Diego, Orange, Los Angeles counties, because who can properly service a range spanning hundreds of miles? So you want to make sure that you put as much here as possible that you can, in fact, reasonably service as a real estate professional. Do you need to add another description or be more specific? Put it in here. Additional buyer preferences and priorities. Now you can check this box and add this form. I wouldn't mess with this. That's just me. That's how I would do it. I don't need to further whittle down or add limitations based on buyer preferences. Now, if you can think of something that is worth noting, go ahead and leave a comment, but I would skip this right here. Properties excluded from representation. Well, this is likely going to be a property in which the buyer entered with another agent or may have a commitment to another agent prior to coming along with you. So if a buyer said, hey, I made an offer on a property, it didn't work out, they could get back to us and change their mind. I don't know, but I'm not working with that agent anymore. I'd say, you know what, let's put that property address here so that if that seller does come back, you can pick up where you left off with that last agent. But everything else, that's me. Everything else, I'm your agent for, but we'll put an exception here. All right, compensation, obviously very important. I'm putting 2.5%. Now, it asks for percent of the acquisition price, and you can add on a dollar amount, or you can change this into whatever you put over here, or you can make this even more complex and attach a compensation schedule. I'm not going to go through any separate documents in this tutorial, maybe later, but I'm showing you most of the time people are going to put a number here. And that number is going to be something like this, 2.5%. Now keep in mind, obviously the higher the better, of course. Now something else to note, if you put a low number here, that's the max that you can make from everyone on the transaction. So don't do it. Don't fall in that trap. Don't put a super low number here to appease the buyer, because you can't just collect that. You can't collect 0.5% or 1% from the buyer and then get 1% from the seller or 1% from the listing broker and think, yeah, I made my 2.5 or 3% back. Nope, you're limited to whatever you put here. And then they have this verbiage here. If broker receives compensation from seller or others for broker's representation of buyer, meaning if you get paid from anyone, if you're the buyer's agent, whoever you get paid from, that amount shall be credited against buyer's obligation to pay broker. That means whoever gives you money, the seller pays you directly, the listing broker pays you, that is deducted from this number. This is a conversation you need to have with your client, because in the near future, sellers are going to offer either a payment, a concession to the buyer that offsets this, or they're going to pay you directly. There's even a different form, the seller payment to the buyer's broker. And if you get paid from the seller, you get to deduct it from here, and that gives relief to the buyer. So you need to explain what the implications of this are. Continued right to payment for broker-involved properties. Let's say this thing's going to expire. Again, we only have 3 months here, right? And the buyer doesn't want to extend, but one of the properties that they made an offer on right before this agreement expired, that could turn into a deal. That's why you want to have a number here that basically allows a continuation period once this representation period ends. 30 days is good. 60 days is even better. The longer, the better, in my opinion. But 30 is just fine. Now, here's something else that's very important. Cancellation rights. So up here, if you leave this type of representation non-exclusive by default, which I advise against, well, either party can cancel and it's effective immediately, unless you check this box and write in a number here. But it says right here, non-exclusive representation, okay? Cancellation is effective upon receipt. Exclusive, remember up here, which is what I recommend, exclusive, 30 days after receipt, meaning you have to give a 30-day notice to the other party. Now, of course, that can be changed. You could change that down here in other terms. Maybe you only want 15. Maybe you want 7. Maybe you want to waive it entirely. It can be changed right here. But I'm just saying, this right here, pay attention to it, because this means if you have an exclusive relationship, there's a 30-day notice. You can't just drop someone overnight, because we all know that it's not hard to imagine a buyer getting seduced by another agent, canceling the night before they see a property or make an offer the following morning. So this gives a cool-off period, we'll call it. So I say leave it alone. Check exclusive up top and leave it alone. All right. When should the buyer give you personal financial information? Sooner the better, right? Does the buyer have cash? Does the buyer have cash to actually do a down payment? What are we looking for here? Proof of funds. And we're looking for a lender pre-approval letter if the buyer is obtaining a mortgage. That's what we're hoping to get. By default, 5 days. I put 3, sooner the better. It's up to you. You'll know when you need to check these boxes down here on this line G2. And this actually this can open all sorts of doors to other scenarios, but this is going to be more rare. So I'm not going to go into detail here. If you have questions, leave a comment, but you'll know if you need to check a box here. Other terms, blank area for you to put in whatever you want. All right. Both parties initial, you, the agent, and your client. All right. And then by default, this form automatically checks this box for a broker compensation advisory, because in this post-settlement world, you're going to see verbiage everywhere warning consumers or advising consumers that commissions are entirely negotiable. They're not fixed by law. They're not regulated. It's entirely up to them. They can negotiate whatever they want. It's an advisory, so that this sort of the argument made by the plaintiffs in this original lawsuit that spurred all this, that can't be done again, because now everyone's properly advised. All right, so we go down here. I mean, you can see right here, compensation, fully negotiable, stuff like that. Broker right to compensation. Basically, all this verbiage secures. I won't read all of it because that would be boring, and this could take hours because I could just go on and on about it. But basically, this gives a little bit of a backstory to all the terms we talked about up here. So broker right to compensation, getting paid through escrow, what constitutes broker involvement, whether you're an exclusive or non-exclusive. Hint, exclusive is always better. Again, why you should check the box for exclusive up top. So it secures your right to compensation no matter what. Less ambiguity about an agent with a buyer with multiple agents talking to those multiple agents about the same property, and then those agents fighting over who actually was involved and then disputing under these terms of broker involvement. So that's why you're trying to eliminate ambiguity. That's one of the purposes of having a contract. This goes on about continuation of compensation, which I talked about before, and that is getting paid if the transaction or this agreement expires, but the work that you've done during the representation period leads to a transaction after the fact. That's what that continuation of compensation is. Timing of compensation, basically getting paid through escrow, how you're getting paid. All right, let me scroll through here and see if anything's actually worth mentioning. So I would say read through this. It all corresponds to what you see up here. It just gives a little bit more detail, because usually when there's a dispute from a term up top in this matrix area, this chart, people need to read down here and say, okay, what actually constitutes the term? What does that mean? What does broker involvement mean? And here it is defined. So these lines offer definition, agency relationship, blah, blah, blah. This is just boilerplate text. Broker authorization obligations. Okay. I mean, what are the obligations of each party to each other? Reasonable care. I mean, it's kind of a snooze fest. You can read through it if you want. Mediation for dispute resolution. Good. If the parties have an issue, it goes to mediation first by default rather than immediately going to court. Okay. Now here's where it gets good again. Exclusive representation. By the way, you'll initial on the bottom of these pages. As I'm scrolling through, just initial at the bottom of these pages. Okay. Exclusive representation. If we checked exclusive up top, like I recommend, it says right there on line 2A2. All right. This is another advisory saying, basically telling the buyer what it means to be exclusive. And they have to read this, and they're saying, by signing this, they're not going to enter into another agreement with another agent. They're not going to cause a conflict with this agreement. And that you are due compensation for what you've done. Broker involvement. Remember how I showed you there are all those definitions of what constitutes broker involvement. And it explains the cancellation, 30-day notice, etc. Pretty simple. Make sure the buyer signs here. Then it confirms compensation again, right there. Just to really drive the point home. It's a bit redundant, but that's the litigious world that we're in. Entity buyer, you'll check this box if you're a buyer. Oh, look at this. So filling this out with my haste to get this video up as soon as I could, I didn't check this box right here. You know, make sure to check the box if you have. Learn from this mistake, please. If you put a number here, check that box first. You always want to check the box if you fill in the corresponding line next to it. That can cause technical problems in the future. Let me check up top. If I check the box, we'll just go right up to the top. So up here, you don't have to check the box. It would be nice if the people that made this form had this number populate, because you know how you can put your address in one part of the form or your name in one part of the form, it populates throughout the form. They should be doing that here, because having this as a checkbox down here and not up top, this is actually a disservice to agents. But I could nitpick these forms all day because they are far from perfect. If you have a percentage, make sure you check this box, all right? Because this form has a flaw in it, at least one. All right, entity buyer, check the box if your buyer is an LLC or a corporation, or they're a trust, any sort of entity. And you'll put the name of the authorized signer on behalf of the trust or the entity, whatever it is. And then buyer's going to sign. And if there's more than one buyer or multiple buyers, incorporate this form, the ASA. You're going to sign down here. And that's it. Okay, so that is the representation agreement itself. Now, I'm going to scroll through this very quickly because this is just boilerplate, boring advisories. Buyer investigation advisory. Okay, we get it. Buyer should do investigations, and the buyer signs off. Broker compensation advisory. They tell you all these things because, again, the post-lawsuit litigious world requires that there's going to be just hundreds of pages of disclosures in the future. And this is all part of them building up, okay? So fully negotiable, additional compensation. There could be dual agency. Fully negotiable again. You get the idea. And we scroll down. Buyers are going to sign. Possible representation of more than one buyer-seller. We see this in the purchase agreement. It's a bit redundant. There's a lot of overlap in how CAR bundles their forms. Consumer Privacy Act advisory, and then buyer's going to sign. Okay, and we made it through 13 pages, and hopefully not too long. If you have any questions, please leave a comment, and thank you for watching.